we're going to go ahead and kick this thing off. So, again, thank you everyone for being here, and don't forget about Slido.
It's a little loud. Can you bring it down?
We can. Okay, later, please. Don't remind me.
Give her the tour of Sierra.
Okay. I think this is the mic volume right here, so I'm turning it down. Is that a little bit better in the back? Still too high? Good? Okay, cool. So mic's on, guys. So we're going to kick off the panel now. So there's a huge mix, as we know, of people that are here from various parts of just the drone industry, people that are just wanting to be educated on this, and then those that might want to actually enter the drone industry already. So I want to kick off this first question. Let's start to my right with Jessie. So we've come pretty far in the drone industry. I myself have been in it for 4 years, 4+ years. Where are we today? I mean, if you can kind of condense how far we've come in the past 4 or 5 years when commercial drones and drone technology started, where do you, how would you kind of advise and condense that for the audience?
So I remember 4 years ago, my first 3 drones flew away. I remember, I don't know if any of you guys had this experience, but in the early days of the drone industry, the reliability numbers were super low. And it wasn't unusual for your drone to sort of just take off over the clouds and you might not see it again. So I think for me, one of the biggest things that's changed over the years is the reliability numbers and what you can expect your aircraft to do. At that time, you know, it was a lot of it you had to build yourself. A lot of it you had to dig into the code base a little bit and move some levers around and then ping some of the core developers and say, hey guys, your documentation isn't right. Like, what does this actually say? And so I think right now we've really gone from drones as a hobby, as a side project, as a remote control industry into really something that's beginning to take shape. It's beginning to gain traction, and really it's going from a buzzword to actually becoming a business case. And I think that's one of the core differentiators is in the beginning, you know, it was a lot of people that loved the technology and they were building the technology for the sake of the technology. Now it's really about what are those business cases, how do we move forwards as an industry.
Totally agreed. Jono, so you bring a little bit different perspective on this. And so Jono, again, is from DroneDeploy, and that's primarily a software company, but you know, I know the DroneDeploy lore going back to like 2010, whenever you guys were in university and kind of concocting this. How did you guys start, and you know, what was the first objective of DroneDeploy, and how has that evolved over time to get where we are today in 2017, where we all work for drone companies or in the drone industry, and you can make a living off this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So 3 founders I've been friends with Nick, one of them, for about 18 years, and all 3 of us have been hacking on stuff together for about 12 or 13 years, which is fun. You get to work with your friends. And over the course, we've always been enamored by flights. I built my first RC aeroplanes when I was about 7 with my cousin, when we had to go to the airfield and we had to literally pull like crystals and put like your crystal channel up so that you wouldn't interfere with other people, and now everything's like digital and amazing. And we were playing with these remote control helicopters, and this was before autopilots, before stabilization. So when I say we were playing with them, we were crashing them a lot and spending most of our time trying to rebuild them. But we got pretty bold and brave, and we would duct tape little point-and-shoot cameras onto the bottom of the helicopters, and we'd fly around looking at this little black dot in the sky, and you know, we had about 5 minutes of battery life back then. You'd come back and land, and you'd have about 400 photographs, and about 2 or 3 of them would be nice. And we started to see that there was like this amazing value. This is around like 2008, 2009-ish, that you could like see the world from above from this different perspective. And it used to be a highly trained professional in a very expensive helicopter that had to come from an airport all the way over to what you were trying to take pictures of, and you used to have to pay like thousands of dollars an hour. And here we were with these like cheap little toys that we bought from the internet with a punchy camera duct taped on, and getting pictures of the world, and it was like amazing. So we tried to start a whole bunch of companies, and we always said, well, you know, we'll be super successful, and then on Fridays we'll have like Drone Fridays. And we kept trying to do little stabs at the drone industry to do like anti-poaching solutions in South Africa. We tried to do like a legal and real estate photography, all with these drones that would duct tape cameras on the front kind of stuff. And the technology wasn't there, but we kept bumping into these problems of getting the drones to do what you wanted it to do for a real kind of commercial intent, and making sense of the stuff that was coming out of the other end was really hard. And in 2012, suddenly there was like, Chris Anderson went to 3DR full time, and there are these new types of batteries, new types of motors, and like all this technology was changing. And we suddenly got this feeling that like the hardware was moving, but no one was making them do the stuff you wanted it to do and make sense of the stuff that came out the other end. And so we decided to say, we won't do Drone Fridays, we'll instead quit everything, and I quit my PhD, that's why I have the 2/3 of it. And we moved out here and lived in a one-bedroom apartment and tried to make drones do the stuff we wanted to do and make sense of the stuff that came out the other end.
And you mentioned, so the technological advances have been huge, and I think nobody really understands that as much truly from the nuts and bolts and the zeros and ones as DJI. So DJI is a Chinese drone manufacturer, and Mr. Romeo Durscher on the end of our panel here works there. And so, Romeo, you've seen DJI. There was a slide. DJI just had a conference called Airworks in Denver just a week or two ago, and they showed a slide, and it said, in 2006, DJI had 20 employees, 20, and now they have 11,000, with 25% of those on the engineering team. So so Romeo.
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think it was somebody found Jessie's fan that flew away and said, we have to fix this issue, and we need to hire all these people to get it fixed, and that's how it started. No, it's quite amazing. I started at DJI 3 years ago, and I had 1,400 co-workers, and it was kind of nice and cozy. And I was at headquarters in Shenzhen, China, which is a different world. And I came back and I did my stuff, and 6 months later I went back, and suddenly there were 4,000 people. It's like, what happened? It's quite impressive to see how fast this technology has moved. And the best way to describe it is, when I started flying these platforms, mostly here along the coast side, then in Europe, people will come up and say, "What is this?" And you would explain it to them, and they were like, "Wow, that's awesome," and walk away. Then a few years later, it would be, "Can you get that stupid drone out of my face?" And then a couple of years later, it's like, "Thank you so much for what you're doing." So this is how the public is looking at the drone technology. So we're going through these phases. We're going through the technology phase. We're going through the software phase that powers the hardware, but we're also going through the acceptance phase, and I think that's the exciting part. Where today we're using this technology to save lives and properties with first responders. We're doing wonderful things on the humanitarian side, and we're helping farmers, for example, to better do what they do best. And that, to me, is the exciting part of where we have come.
Yeah, totally agree. And so the podcast is called Commercial Drones FM, and so I really focus on the business use because there's been a crazy amount of hobbyist use, is kind of what we call them in the industry, where someone buys a drone, uses it, takes some pretty nice photographs, takes it on vacation, flies it for fun, races it, what have you. But there's real businesses using drones, and they're providing real value. And so we're going to kind of snake back around here. And Jono, maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the industries that are using drones and how are they actually saving money with these things, which is leading to, well, not just money, but of course, as Romeo knows, they're saving lives. But how is this leading to the ROI, the return on investment on these drones, and how this has kind of changed their perception over time to these useful robots?
Yeah, so what we do at DroneDeploy is a handful of things. We make drones take off and fly around in these very well organized patterns and take a lot of photographs. And then we take all those photographs and we do a lot of computer vision, machine learning in the cloud to turn them into these rich 2D and 3D models of the world. And then have these tools on the other end that let you analyze and make sense of those 2D and 3D models. So what this little robot's doing is taking off and it's taking these like digital snapshots of the world in 3 dimensions. And so every industry that we see things moving, like atoms moving around and the world changing, have just this huge benefit of being able to see what that change is and make sense of that change. So in agriculture, I have thousands of acres of farmland, and in some areas there are problems. How do I know where those problems are? It's either walking through and getting scratched at 110 degrees and it's really sweaty and there are bugs everywhere, or you can press go and this little robot will fly around and map this area for you, and you'll be able to have this really up-to-date view of your farm and walk to the problem areas and really see what's going on, and then try fix them and do it again and see, did I fix it? Is it better? How much better? Construction, everyone has these little pieces of paper with little squiggles on them, but they're really hard to understand what those squiggles mean. And if you just take this digital snapshot and then you can see, like, these are the construction plans in 3D on this point cloud of what the world currently looks like today, it's super easy to see where are we off, like what is built versus what is planned, how is that different. Yeah, insurance, mining, those are the big ones we play in, but everything that the world changes, this is this new tool that can just help you see and understand the world that much clearer.
What are there's some pretty big figures on how much money they've saved. I mean, at DroneDeploy, you guys understand from a lot of different users from around the world in different industries, and you hear about these use cases where there's like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars saved. I mean, aren't there some interesting ones you can share for specific scenarios?
The biggest number we got was in insurance. We saved one company with a DJI drone that cost about $1,000, and our software, in a single flight, they saved €100 million. And that was this seaside resort town in the south of France burnt down. And it was either the fault of that seaside resort or the next door neighbors. And they couldn't get aircraft in, it was kind of cloudy, they couldn't use satellites, there wasn't high enough resolution. And so they got these guys in with the drone to just come and like give it a shot. And they were able to very accurately take measurements and prove what the cause of this fire was and where it emanated from by looking at weather conditions and taking that drone data, and ended up saving the insurance company a lot of money. Construction sites, we routinely save hundreds of thousands of dollars where someone said they were doing something and they weren't actually doing that thing. Municipalities are responsible for like spraying out where the utilities are. And we had one guy who hit a utility line, and the municipality said, like, you're going to have to pay like, hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix all the stuff and all the damages and everything else, because we weren't able to enter your site because you had fences up, and so we weren't able to spray it. And I was like, no, hang on. I whipped out his phone, opened up the drone map from the day, and it's like, no, look, there's no fence. We can just go back in time and see what the world looked like then. All these, they're really cool stories. If you're interested, plug for our blog.dronedeploy.com. We've got tons of fun case studies like that.
Lots of good stories there. So Jessie, tell us a little bit about Altiscope. So Altiscope is a relatively new company. How old is it?
So we're about a year old right now.
Okay. And what do you guys do? I mean, why does Altiscope exist? So again, this is Airbus. Airbus, the huge aerospace conglomerate based out of Europe with offices all around on the planet. And A-Cubed, their Silicon Valley arm, is meant to actually disrupt Airbus before someone else does. So what exactly are you guys doing at Altiscope that made Airbus so interested in this? And what problem are you guys trying to solve with drone technology or around that area?
So I'm going to step back for a moment and tell you a little bit about A-Cubed, which is our Silicon Valley outpost. As Ian said, our job is to disrupt Airbus before someone else does. So Airbus has recruited entrepreneurs, experts, technologists, the Silicon Valley type, to come in and work on projects. And so about a year ago, a Stanford PhD named Karthik Balakrishnan decided that what needed to happen in order to unlock the potential of the drone industry is we needed to study our airspace. My personal background is in humanitarian airlift. So as Ian mentioned in my bio, I started with uplift aeronautics, which was fixed-wing humanitarian airlift. So how do you break sieges with drones? How do we use drones to get through ground barriers and deliver humanitarian payload? And so one of my biggest challenges during these humanitarian missions was, in fact, the airspace. It was the regulators. It was unlocking this airspace to drone usage, to drones for good, for drones for business, for drones that are supporting human initiatives. And so I, at the time, was teaching at Stanford, and Karthik told me about his project, and it clicked. I said, absolutely, we need to start doing studies of our airspace to understand how do we unlock this airspace to enable the vertical potential. So we right now, we operate in our airspace, but primarily a lot of our logistics is done on the ground. So if you look at the city around you right now, we support pedestrians, we support cars, we support motorcycles, bicycles. But reality, there is a lot more area that we can unlock if we use our airspace. For one example, right now if there is an incident on the street, you can send an ambulance to pick up a person. They'll follow traffic patterns and roads and get back to the hospital. However, if we were able to use a vertical takeoff and landing ambulance, such as the Pana that Airbus is building right now, you could take off from a hospital and land on a nearby rooftop, collect the person, and fly directly to the hospital without having to deal with some of the traffic on the ground. And so for me, Altiscope is really about studying our airspace to unlock potential for future aircraft, business cases, and do it in a safe and efficient manner.
Has anyone been flying their drone? There was quite a few people that raised their hand that they have a drone or they've flown one. Has anyone tried to shoot it down with like a gun or anything when you're flying? Or no? Yeah, a few. Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of one of the challenges as well. And so, with that use case, essentially the eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, it's essentially a flying car is what the media calls it, but it's really not because it doesn't drive and it doesn't have wheels. Anyways, I'll stop there. But with flying cars, with privacy, so Altiscope is focused on this challenge of kind of making your tagline is a blueprint for the skies, which is beautiful because it's not just going to affect autonomous drones with no humans, it's going to affect the potential ambulance drones.
Right. Also, general aviation, commercial traffic. It's really, our airspace is not separate layers. Our airspace is integrated, and the future of the airspace.
A lot of stories about people being, bothered by drones or very protective of their privacy. If you couldn't tell, we're in the section of what are the greatest challenges of the drone industry right now. And so you mentioned your story earlier. So at first people were like in awe and they said get away, and now some of them are like thanking you. And so you do a lot of search and rescue work with a lot of the first responders at your work at DJI. But what's going on with privacy? Are there people worried that drones are spying on them still? What's going on with that, and what are some of maybe the other opportunities, or rather challenges, that drones are presented with right now?
I think this is a regional issue. Here in the United States, if you have noticed an accent, I'm from South Chicago, Switzerland. So Europe is a little bit different. So let's look at Switzerland. No, not Switzerland. Let's look at the United States. Privacy here is a big concern for everyone. Yet, God, how many times do we check in ourselves on Twitter and on Facebook, and we give away every little detail of our lives, but behold, there is a drone 100 feet up above our house, all hell breaks loose. So it's a really interesting concept. But reality is, the moment you have a flying camera, you can see things that you would probably normally not see on the ground. And that concerns people, because they may not understand what you're doing. And we have an interesting relationship here in the United States with our police force, for example. Everything is cool. They can fly helicopters with extremely sophisticated camera systems that can see pretty much everything day and night. But boy, if they're using a drone, all hell breaks loose again. So it's really fascinating to go through these motions. So what it does take is education. It takes education on multiple levels. We need to educate the operators to use the technology in smart ways, and to also think twice, should I be flying this low over a backyard, yes or no? Maybe you're totally fine doing it, but is it ethically correct? You know, that's the second question. And then it also takes education on a grander scheme, the public, the people that don't use drones, that don't know about drones. If we can tell them the real stories of how we use technology, the farmer that we're helping, and all the people that we've saved in either floods or search and rescue operations, the acceptance will increase dramatically over time. So I truly believe education is a key component in making all of this work and changing that public perception about spying and privacy, and that drones are actually there for a good and beneficial purpose.
And Jono, I want to talk about the dichotomy of hardware and software. So, as you've heard from this, I mean, we've kind of gone from like the early stages, 2008 and beyond, into where we are today, 2017, and that couldn't happen without these technological advances. Being in San Francisco, some of you might be interested in joining the drone industry. There is a level of enablement that each layer has to provide the other. So the hardware has to be capable enough for the software to run on it, and vice versa. And so how has the dichotomy between hardware and software, and for the potential software engineers or hardware engineers that are here that are interested in the drone industry, you know, how has that evolved, and has that really enabled us to get where we are today? Today there's over 60,000 commercial drone pilots in the United States, something like 66,000, and it was growing at a clip. And the commercial drone operational, or the Part 107 rule was actually only announced or made available in August 2016. So it's been a bit over a year, and now there's over 65,000 commercial drone pilots. So dichotomy of software and hardware, has that played a part in this? And if so, how?
So the story of hardware and software, once upon a time you had to, as Jessie was saying, buy bits of stuff off the internet and solder it together and screw it together. And that was kind of the era where we started. We started as a software-only company because hardware is really hard and we don't really know what we're doing with hardware. So we're kind of forced to be a software company. And we were just like, well, we'll just let other smarter people deal with that stuff. But we would go out and we would test these drones, and something would crash, and it would be, well, was it my bad soldering? Was it the hardware that was wrong? Was it the like embedded systems level software of like the control loops that were stopping it from, you know, falling over in the sky? Was it my fault? And it was really hard to try and tease those apart. And as Jessie was saying, like as that reliability on the lower level stuff increased, there became this really strong foundation. But because there was this era before DJI had an SDK and you could start to control the drones, before there was a stable hardware platform, there were a ton of companies that went out and said, well, we're going to just do everything because that foundation doesn't exist. And so what we've seen over the last handful of years is that a lot of companies started off saying, well, we're going to do the drone hardware, we're going to build the autopilots, we're going to build the electronic speed controllers, like the really low-level stuff, as well as like the flight control, as well as the data processing, and heck, we'll even just go out and fly them for you because they're kind of complicated. So they all the way up to the services side. And as time has gone on, we started to see really strong players emerge at those different levels, and we started to see like the industry shake out a bit and start to specialize a bit more. And so, DJI released their SDK in 2014. We were really excited because we didn't have to solve that stuff together anymore, so we jumped on it immediately, and we've been kind of really focused on building stuff for the DJI products because they're just so prevalent and accessible in terms of price, as well as just being able to order spares from Amazon and things like that. And we've seen over the last 3 years that a lot of those companies that were doing that hardware stuff have started to try and push above it because you just can't compete with 11,000 people that are R&D right next to the factory as well. And so we started to definitely see this like distribution become a bit more bimodal and in focus. Yeah, so I don't know if that helps explain where that dichotomy is coming from and how things are shaping up. But it's like as people are emerging as like key winners, then everyone else has to be like, oh shit, well now what are we going to do? So then they kind of move around and jostle and figure their space.
DJI is a force to be reckoned with in that regard, in the hardware regard, but soon also with software, I predict. But taking that into, so Jessie, why don't we have drone deliveries yet? The reason why I ask that is because, is it a hardware problem? Is it a software problem? What's the problem? Why am I not buying my package from Amazon right now and getting it delivered to my door?
It's a great question, Ian.
Is the hardware capable of doing that?
Yes, the hardware is capable of doing it. There have been a lot of prototypes, and there have been a lot of tests, and there have been ship-to-shore deliveries, and there have been Domino's deliveries, and there's been taco deliveries, and there's been one-off deliveries. The issue is systemization. It's getting drones to operate as an infrastructure in the background. There have been many companies out there, Matternet, Flurry, that are really were able to demonstrate that this is possible in a certain environment. But there's only one company that I can think of that's actually doing it as a continuous delivery service, which is Zipline. They are delivering medical products in Rwanda, blood to be specific. So they're doing an excellent job, but they chose the Rwandan ecosystem for a reason, because they had a lot more flexibility out there. They're avoiding population centers. And so one of the challenges for drone delivery service is the way that it interacts with the environment around it. So the regulatory interactions, the governance of your cities, the way we've designed our cities, the way we've designed our homes. So several of the things we need to sort out is, so if you did have a drone deliver something to your home, where would it land? How would it fly? What airspace would it move through? How far would it be able to fly from other drones, other aircraft, buildings, etc.? So for example, if you're a local regulator, and there's a lot of privacy concerns. So your local civilians decide, I do not want a drone flying 100 meters from my building. So you create this rule. One of the problems with that type of rulemaking is that you're shutting off lots of future potential use cases. So every month, a window washer is either killed or seriously hurt washing windows. That is a very low-hanging fruit business model for a drone company. You could start a drone company that washes windows and save human life. However, your local governance has just decided that this is not allowed. So there's a lot of studies and a lot of thought that needs to go into the regulation that we're doing. And so that's something that Altascope is working, building simulators for, modeling, studying, working with governments around the world to help them solve.
And so some of you may have seen in the news some I guess, movement out of the Trump administration. There was something announced recently. It's called the UAS IPP. It's the Unmanned Aerial Systems Integration Pilot Program. Basically what that is it's the federal government in the United States enabling local governments and tribal governments and municipalities to participate and kind of like lobby to be part of this new UAS IPP or DIPP, Drone Integration Pilot Program, whatever you want to call it. And so that means that potentially San Francisco, the city that we're in, could actually apply to the FAA to be part of this program and then hopefully be able to be very lenient in the rules that they kind of grant these private companies, maybe Altascope, maybe DroneDeploy, maybe even DJI, who also has an office around here, to operate and kind of do these beyond visual line of sight operations, which are illegal right now unless you get the proper waiver. And so those are really supposed to be opening up the airspace. And that's just a little tidbit about like current news right now. So I myself am really hoping that San Francisco or San Mateo or San Jose or someone in the Bay Area, Oakland, is lobbying to be part of the drone integration pilot program. So going back to Romeo, so I want to ask you, coming from DJI, DJI, again, largest drone manufacturer on the planet, the dichotomy of hardware and software, how has that evolved since you've been in the company? And I will say that you made a Facebook post recently there's a drone called the Inspire 1. A lot of you might have seen it. It's totally badass. It's like the Ferrari of drones. When it first came out, it was 3 years ago. People are still using that. And I kind of liken drones to a cell phone. You kind of upgrade every 2 years. And, you know, because at that point, the software and hardware starts slowing down. Maybe you need to get like the latest and greatest. So how did the Inspire 1 last for 3 years in commercial operations and beyond? And how has the dichotomy of hardware and software played a role in that?
I think the Inspire 1 was an amazing platform. When it was released in November, 3 years ago actually, over the last weekend, we celebrated the 3rd anniversary of its launch. And it set the stage for what I call the second drone revolution. Because first of all, it was a completely different form factor. You had retractable landing gear. It was really like futuristic Star Trek, Star Wars type of platform. But you, for the first time, had a modular platform where you could exchange cameras. And in the beginning, that was not even thought of, because in the beginning we only had one camera. It would take almost another year to really realize that, wait a second, I can take the camera off and put something else on there, a different payload. And then also at the same time, the SDK, the software development kit, what Jono mentioned before, where third-party software engineers can build a code-based product that runs on the drone and potentially solves a certain problem. That really changed the industry. Because up until that time, we had all these really fun platforms, and they all did something, but nothing was really that beneficial to the commercial sector. And I think that was the big change 3 years ago. And ever since, we're seeing more technologies being integrated. If you open up a Phantom 4 and you open up a Phantom 1, it's amazing the difference of everything that's crammed into that Phantom 4 versus what's in Phantom 1. There's only 4 years in between. And so it's amazing how much more technology we have now in the sky, how much more safety features we've built into all of this, and how many more software applications run these platforms. But at the end of the day, it takes all of you to operate them. And I think that's another big and important factor that we need to consider. Because at the end of the day, the weakest link is me, the operator. I am the one that makes the mistakes. I am the one that crashes my drone because I did something that I was not supposed to be doing. And if we can overcome that piece with either automation or additional hardware or additional software features, boy, I mean, what else can go wrong, right?
So I want to take a tiny tangent, Romeo, while you've got the mic in your hand. So Romeo, I don't know who here really knows what he does exactly. I don't know if Romeo knows what he does exactly, but he has probably one of the coolest jobs on the planet. I'm not even kidding. Romeo has told these stories. So for reference, he's been a guest on the podcast. He's the only one on this panel so far that has been a guest on the podcast, episode 40-something or 30-something. And you told these incredible stories. And so Romeo has been to these insane far reaches of the planet operating drones. And so if you could condense, one of my favorite stories is just the Vietnamese caves, flying drones inside those caves. And can you just tell us briefly, a little bit about that, and then how that came about? Because it's just such an incredible story to hear about.
Yeah, and I think one of the taglines of that podcast was the story of my favorite platform was the Inspire 1, and still is the Inspire 1, and how we kind of slept with the Inspire 1, next to the Inspire 1, in the cave. So what happened was, ABC Good Morning America, very forward-thinking production team, wanted to showcase areas to their viewers that you would normally never see. And not only showcase them from a ground-based camera, but do live TV broadcast from a drone somewhere crazy all over the world. And we did a project over an active volcano in Iceland, and then we went to the world's largest cave in central Vietnam, Son Doong. And the size of the cave is tremendous. There's one area where you can stack two 747s right next to each other and you would still have space. It's a cave that has its own weather system. It has a jungle inside the cave. And we were flying in there doing live TV broadcasts from the Inspire 1. And think about that. That by itself is a tremendous attest to that technology that we can do that. But of course, when you go into such crazy environments, something is always bound to go wrong. And we certainly had our share of stuff that went wrong. But that's the fun part, because with everything that goes wrong, you have to learn how to make it right, and that's how you improve upon the technology. So if you ever want to see some footage, just do ABC Good Morning America, Google, put in ABC Good Morning America, Vietnam, and you'll see it. Tremendous footage, one of the most beautiful places that I've seen, and one of the funnest projects that we've done.
And you became deathly ill during this trip, right?
Yes, yeah. So we had to do 2 trips. Yeah, that was bad. So the first trip, we had to go there to see, can we even do a live broadcast from that remote area inside this cave with a drone, with a satellite dish. And while we were in the cave, we got E. coli. And when you're in a cave and you're so ill that you probably just want to sleep all day and die in the cave, it's really hard to get out of the cave. It's really, really hard. And then we had 11 days turnaround. We had to come home, pack everything we needed, which was 100+ cases, and go right back. And E. coli stays with you for quite some time. So being in a cave with E. coli is no fun.
The things we do to sleep with an Inspire 1.
It's the new tagline now.
So, being in Silicon Valley, I mean, the 2 letters VC are so widely known and prominent. John, I'll ask you because you're very intimately aware of the current space, and people here might be interested in that kind of thing. So, what's happening with drone investments today? I mean, drone companies, hardware companies, software companies, companies that are focusing on the framework of drones. I mean, can you give us a little overview of how the venture capitalists, with all their billions of dollars, are looking at drones, and is the money still funneling in? Because there was a couple of years where it was just going up and up and up. And what's the deal right now?
We got a lot of meetings, which was cool, because they're like, oh, this is fun, this is new. And we would go and we'd sit down, and we'd talk for half an hour, and then they'd kind of say like, oh, so you guys are raising money, are you? And he was like, ah, well, this is going to be a waste of time, and just kind of here to learn about it. But then it became quite interesting in around 2015. There started to be this change of like, oh wow, this is actually going to be something. They actually are quite useful. When we went out to raise our seed round in 2013, we didn't really know what we were going to do. We were just like, oh, it's hard to make these things do stuff and figure out what to do based on that information. And we experimented with a lot of people, and suddenly in 2015, it was like, oh, we've got these real users, and we had people in like 120 countries around there who were starting to use these like drones. And then suddenly it was like this shift of future crazy something to, wow, there's actually real data, and we can actually start to look at revenue metrics, and we can start to look at these things as like normal businesses. So that was that kind of first wave, and now 2017, 2018, there's like this next, people are probably going out in the like Series C is like the front runners in the industry are going out and raising that. But there are all these new secondary startups that are coming up and working through. So we've seen a bunch of companies that are like focused on machine learning for drone data, or how do we do a lot of the orchestration of multi-drone missions, or like the second order effects of that first wave. So that first wave, like very much, we're building hardware, we're getting that base level of data out, and now we're seeing like the second wave of that happening. What is cool though is because it's a new industry, because it's exciting. I think if you're going out there and you're saying, we're going to go and raise money for the next CRM or some, display ad, internet, market, it's really hard to get taken seriously. With the drone space, it's still kind of cool and sexy, so you get to talk to fun people. And because the industry is still trying to figure itself out as well, as Jessie was saying, we're still in that very, very early stage of that early majority. We're just letting go of the innovators on the hype curve. So the numbers on what does a traditional Series C company look like in terms of revenue, in terms of growth rates, in terms of all this other stuff, it's still kind of unknown. So you have a bit more flexibility, but with that, there's also a lot more risk and uncertainty, and then risk in general can be the upside or downside. So yeah, it's a ton of fun. There's a lot of interest. People are taking it seriously as real companies. It's not like an experiment anymore, and we're starting to see that second wave.
And how much money has DroneDeploy raised, and how many rounds?
So we did a 2 million seed in 2013. And then our Series A was in 2015, we did 9, and then we did 20 in our Series B last year.
Okay, so a little over
30
million. Okay, so somewhat famously, I don't know, some people might be aware, but there was a big drone company locally called 3D Robotics. There still is a drone company called 3D Robotics, but they kind of went through a lot of money to the tune of over $100 million, going head-to-head with DJI. And they didn't do too well on the hardware front, so they've pivoted to software, which is obviously much lower overhead and takes a little bit less manpower and logistics and things. So this is my favorite, almost one of my favorite parts about the drone industry is the drama surrounding it, because it's so fast moving that you see just all this competition and all this heated funding and millions here and rumors and whatever. And so it's really awesome to see that happening. And that brings me to my next question. And I'll ask you, Jessie, what is the greatest opportunity today in the drone industry?
I thought you were going to have me talk about Chris Anderson. So the greatest opportunity in the drone industry. So, as Jono was saying, there's such a diversity right now. We're really in such nascent stages of this industry, and a lot of the hard, crazy shit has been figured out. Early days, we had props falling off. We had drones flying away. We had, it was the Solo, and it was the, early days of the first Phantoms. And now we're started finally having business cases, which is remarkable because you can actually build a lasting business. So the first couple drone companies really just were utterly dependent on VC money, and now there's an opportunity in the industry to actually make and scale a company based off of revenue, which I think is really exciting. If you want to start a small company and scale it, you don't have to accept VC money, and you don't have to kind of move in traditional Silicon Valley fashion. So I think that's interesting. I think there is an opportunity to think about one of the problems right now is that everyone thinks about the drone and then they think about the pilot. I don't think that's the future of the drone industry. I think it is going to be drones as an infrastructure servicing us in the background. So they're collecting actionable data points, they're delivering packages, but they're doing all of this sort of as an automized fleet rather than one human controlling one drone. And so I think that there's both an opportunity to go build a small business and self-fund it and do it through revenue, and there's also the opportunity to rethink how this industry is thinking about itself and disrupt a nascent industry.
I'm very proud to say that the podcast has not accepted any VC funds, so this is a fully self-funded business. And speaking about...
I think I funded the podcast.
Oh, okay, VC fund. So unless you're a venture capitalist, so it is supported directly by the listeners as well as some marketing kind of advertising partners as well. But speaking of servicing drones, I was going to make a bad Vietnamese cave joke about servicing drones or drones servicing us, but I'll spare everyone in the audience about that. So I want to say, you know, Romeo, you're probably privy to a lot of things you can't say to the audience, of course, being at DJI, and you guys are really pushing the limits. I mean, you did the Inspire 1, which is just a game-changing with drones. The Phantom 2 Vision Plus was game-changing. The Mavic Pro, with its tiny foldable body and its 4K camera and 30-minute flight time, was also game-changing. There's probably many more game-changing products coming up. But regardless of that, what do you feel that the future of the drone industry holds for consumers and businesses alike? And how could everyone in the audience maybe play a part in that?
So let's look at the hobbyist side, because that is actually a fun area to look at, and it kind of, you know, there's also business opportunities there as well. But let's look at the hobbyist side. The technology is here that you can launch a platform from the palm of your hand. You wave at it, you give it a command by interacting with the drone. It will take a selfie, which is a droney, and you put your hand back out and it will land on your hand. Come on, that's pretty darn awesome. If we can do that already, that goes right into what Jessie was saying. The drone, we're so used to flying these devices with a device that has two sticks, and you manipulate the sticks to do something with the platform. Man, that is such old technology. And we're gonna be changing the way we're interacting with these platforms. And we're just now starting to see the first wave of direct input to a platform in the air. And that's just the beginning. That's on the consumer side, you know, that's the fun stuff. You may be on top of a mountain and we want to take this really cool drone for your Instagram, and you just launch it and wave at it and it takes the picture. I mean, that's pretty darn awesome. Now, of course, when you go out into the construction industry and you have a big project and you see somebody waving at a drone, that doesn't work there. There needs to be different type of automation. But at any point right now today, you still have these remote controllers that are big, and they have sticks and they have buttons, and that's how we interact with the hardware. The future is that we will much less interact. That's a given. We will have more autonomy, and we may not even notice that the drones are doing something for us right now. And I think there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in not only at DJI but at other companies to make the next wave of aerial platforms, and they're going to be really, really fun, and they're going to be doing stuff that we cannot even imagine right now.
And Jono, I'll pose a similar question to you, but I want to focus this on one of your specialties, which is like the AI, machine learning, computer vision, basically all the buzzwords. Maybe we'll throw blockchain in there just for good measure. Where is drone technology going, and what opportunities exist for drones in that regard? And let's just tailor it to commercial applications. So different industries using drones for business.
Yeah, Romeo's got this nice, shiny, white, clean view of the future. Mine's kind of more of this, like, maybe hyper-realistic, gritty, Blade Runner-y kind of like. So, on the future, I think, like, everyone kind of hit on it, the automation is going to be the thing, and it's going to be, you know, a drone on the commercial side, because you asked folks on that, it's going to be like a drone that lives in a little kennel, and 8 a.m. every morning, you know, this thing is going to open, and it's going to take off, and it's going to do its thing, and it's going to come back, and it's going to land, and it's going to close up, and people aren't even going to worry about it. Like, someone will come around once every 3 weeks and service it, and, you know, maybe switch out batteries or something like that. So I think like that's kind of where the hardware is going. The hardware is just going to disappear. And then on the commercial side, it's going to be, you know, now that we have this foundation and we've got like the first story on the building, what is the other stuff we can build on top of that? And so one view is, you know, everyone talks about this like IoT, and IoT is amazing, and what we're doing is we're scattering the world with these devices that are all going to communicate to some central system. Drones are kind of cool in the sense that instead of saying like we're going to put all these sensors all over the walls, on the floor, on the ground, you basically just like have the one sensor and it moves around by itself. So instead of having your IoT field with thousands of sensors to tell what's going on, you can actually just have this drone fly around and do that all by itself. The assumption you're making is that you're kind of collapsing your own time. So I think on the commercial side, we're going to start to see a lot more interesting sensors. We've had a bunch of approaches on like, how can I stick a Geiger counter on my drone and use this to map for leaks on nuclear power plants, or to detect weapons of mass destruction, or and that's like who would think of sticking a Geiger counter on a drone and flying it around to create this like heat map of radiation. And so I think of like the hardware is going to disappear. It's going to be this cool new way of making sensors move around to do more sensing. And then once we've got really good at that, and once the regulations and everything else are cleared out of the way, then they can actually start taking action in the world as well. So we can do the sensing, but then we can also go and maybe spray the fields, or take tissue samples of plants, or we've seen fun demos of drones actually building buildings by dropping bricks off in different places. And so it's all like, as that foundation solidifies of really robust hardware that you can just leave alone and will take care of itself and will land on its charging pad and do its job again the next day, you build on the next stuff. And so from that machine learning perspective, again, super gritty perspective on that, I think everyone has this like picture of artificial intelligence, that this magical thing, and as soon as we like beat a person at chess, we're like, oh, that's not really AI, it's just a really good chess robot. And then we get these slices of what robots can start to get good at, get sliced off this magical picture of AI. And I guess the slices are what we're now calling machine learning, or just statistics, because it's been around for a while. And it's just like, what are we doing with all this data? And so we now have these autonomous robots that have processing capabilities on board with fun sensors that completely live by themselves. That's where I think like using that data, that's where it starts to get like really fun and interesting. In terms of the advice we were given early on is don't skate to where the puck is now, skate to where the puck's gonna be, so that by the time it gets there, you're in the right place. Kind of start imagining what that future looks like. I can see like 2021, 2022, we're going to have robots in boxes that will fly themselves. So what does that unlock? Yeah.
And to be fair, there's a couple of companies doing that right now.
The drones in boxes?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's coming. As Jessie said, the hardware is all there. It's just when will we feel comfortable to let these things fly by themselves? Like right now, we're paying a person to sit there and literally press go, and the drone takes off and flies around and comes back and lands, and then they put it in a box and drive to the next place to press go. Yeah, it's soon that person's not going to be necessary.
Totally, yeah. And so I'm gonna get to you, Jessie, too. But just a reminder, we're gonna have one more question after this. But if you have questions yourself that we're gonna get to once we're done here, go to the slido.com. And then put it in there, and then we'll try to get to as many as possible. But so we've heard a kind of really bright and nice future that Romeo painted, and a very dystopian, depressing future that Jono painted. Jessie, when you lie awake at night and you think about where you want the drone industry to be in 5 to 10 years, what do you imagine it, and what do you think the future entails?
I did sort of like the image of like drones as dogs in kennels. I've never heard that before.
There's a drone that will walk your dog, actually.
That's wonderful.
Humans live in kennels.
So I'm definitely an optimist, and I think that's allowed me to survive the drone industry for 4 years, because it's been quite a ride. Jono referenced the Gartner's hype cycle a little bit. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but this is, the drone industry has really lived this hype cycle. So the idea is that in the beginning, there's a technology, and articles and media start to write about it, and it gets really hyped up, and everyone's really excited, and it's going to revolutionize the world, and it's going to change everything, and you can use it for this and this and this and this and this. And then the technology, the businesses started like, oh, but we can't use it because of this problem, and you can't use it for this because of this problem, and you can't use it for this, and so you're coming down the backside of this big wave, and it sort of hits this trough of disillusionment, and everyone's like, it was a buzzword, wasn't it? Like, this is bullshit, like nothing, like, And so that was sort of the time when the VCs weren't funding any drone startups. This was, I think, around 2016 or so, and nothing was getting funded, and it was a really hard time for the drone industry. A lot of business cases, you know, we were out there saying that, oh, we'll be able to use it for agriculture, but really the ROI wasn't quite there. And I even remember DroneDeploy, you guys had maybe one case study or something. It was kind of a stretch, I remember. And so we're coming back up.
That was probably in like 2014, 2015. So.
Yeah, maybe you wrote it.
It was really good. It was about soybeans and
yeah, I remember.
It's true.
Good job.
Check it out.
And so we're sort of coming back up the other side here, and we're finding where there are real business cases where we're saving money, you know, $100 million, hundreds of thousands of dollars on a mining site or for insurance. And where I see the industry going is that we're starting to win over public perception, as Romeo mentioned. We're starting to get our hardware and software down, and now we're trying, the next step is really regulation. We need to work with regulators to help them understand their airspaces and allow citizens and people flying the drones also to understand where regulators are coming from in terms of safety and in terms of once you create a rule, it's really hard to unwrite a rule. So that's sort of the stage we are right now in the drone industry, making sure that we allow safe access in an efficient manner to our skies. So, you know, in 5 years, you know, drones is an infrastructure, buzzing around, helping us out.
Yep, totally agree. All kinds of different use cases there, security and cleaning out your gutters and all the boring stuff that you have
Personal
to do.
air taxi.
Robots. Yeah, there you go. Personal air taxi, Uber, NASA,
Window cleaners.
Airbus, all working on those. Window cleaners, removing graffiti, etc. So, lightning round, this is the last question. This was suggested by Romeo, so we have to ask Romeo first. Romeo, what is your most embarrassing drone moment before we get to the Q&A?
Oh, there's so many. You know, when you start early, there are just so many opportunities to fail, and there have been a few. Let's put it that way. But probably one of the most memorable ones goes back into the cave again. We're inside this huge cavern that has 1,000 feet above in the ceiling an opening, and the sunlight just comes in like a beam of light. And you're in the bottom, and there's all this greenery. It's magical. It truly is magical. And because of that beam of light that comes in, you have sunshine and you have shadow right next to each other. And I had this brilliant idea to fly my Inspire halfway in the cold air of the shade and halfway in the warmer air. And inside a cave, you don't have GPS. So these platforms, you fly them manually. You don't just let go of the sticks and it will stop and just hover and you can eat a sandwich and continue flying. No, you have to be on your sticks. Furthermore, in those caves, you have all these different winds that blow in different directions. So your machine is just constantly moving around. So I thought it would be really cool to get that shot. Halfway sunshine, halfway shadow. Well, had I thought this through, I would have realized that the colder air and the warmer air will impact the flight dynamics of the drone, and something would happen and I would probably get surprised and overreact and crash the drone. And that's exactly what happened. But I was not worried, because I just got the most beautiful footage saved on my SD card. And the SD card is in the camera. And
the camera's on the drone, yeah.
And the camera's on the drone that had just crashed somewhere into the cave, and we just had to find it. So I was not worried. So everybody went to look for the drone, and we found the drone, and we found the camera, so the day was saved. Until I wanted to take out the SD card, and it was split in half. So everything was for nothing. And the embarrassing part was there was a stalagmite, and one of the people were standing on top of the stalagmite, and I was first filming them from all sides, and this person was so excited that I got this incredible footage, and then I had to go and say sorry. this is the SD card, your footage is gone. And that was my most embarrassing moment.
That is rough, I'm telling you. Anybody else want to share any embarrassing drone moments? I'm trying to think of mine. Come on, Jono.
So early days as well, stuff's really unreliable. Was it my soldering? Was it my software? Was it someone else's fault? No one knows. So I was doing my PhD in Scotland, and Mike and Nick, the other two founders, we actually started in my apartment, and they lived on my couch. And my girlfriend was very gracious in supporting us and not throwing a fit all the time because we were just taking over the house. Then it was overwhelming, and I was like, actually, peace out. We're gonna go to Silicon Valley and try to do this thing properly. So we moved out to Silicon Valley. We did an accelerator, and we were working hard to try to raise funding. And after about 6 months of just having her stuck in cold, very wet, dark Scotland, eventually I was like, it's safe, you can move out here. So she moved out, all super excited, it's drone stuff, it's amazing. I took her out on her first fly day to show her, like, look at this thing that I've been building for months and months and months and months and months. And this is gonna be the future, it's gonna be amazing. And I was like, look, what you're gonna do is just press take off on this iPhone, and she pressed go, and it just like went flooring its way across at this terrifying like height in this park where people were trying to walk their dogs, and then just I grabbed the remote control. We always had his back up, and just like killed everything, and it was like moving sideways pretty quickly, and like hit the ground and started to just cartwheel, and there's nothing you can do. And she's just mortified. She's like, what have I done? And I was like, well, look at this amazing company we're here to build, and look at the future. I'm so glad that we've moved our entire lives out here and given up everything. And yeah, then we had a glass of wine, and things were better. But it was a pretty awkward couple of minutes.
I've had similar stuff with early days of DroneDeploy, very early days. In the confined areas too, so always be safe. And I'm going to use this time to actually say, never fly your drone during wildfires. We had a huge wildfire, it was terrible. It caused tons of destruction. Romeo was out there, he documented it. There's a program by the FAA called If You Fly, We Can't. So again, just public service announcement. If there's a wildfire, don't try to, I'm not accusing anyone, of course, but just don't, it's not worth the pictures or anything. They're going to be on the news, and always cooperate with authorities. After the hurricanes, there were some great groups that went out there and used their drones to do that too. But anything you want to share, Jessie, as far as embarrassing drone moments before we get to the questions? And we've got a lot of good ones here.
All right, this will be quick then. So I'm in Turkey. I'm in Istanbul specifically. I have my 3DR Solo, snazzy new drone. No one in Turkey had seen it. I am presenting at a conference there, and during my presentation I said, okay, during the break, everyone come outside, we're gonna go see my drone fly. All right, so we're all outside, I have everything set up. The whole conference is outside to see this drone fly. And so it takes off, and it turns around to swivel to take a picture of us. And then it goes, and it is gone, and I have no idea where that drone is to this day.
It just went. It never came back. Wow. See, these are all early days, you know? But we don't have any more embarrassing moments lately. Nothing bad ever happens anymore, but I'm sure everyone in the audience probably has a funny drone moment. So let's move on to the questions, because I know we've got, I mean, Slido has been awesome. So the top question is, what will it take for BVLOS operations? That means beyond visual line of sight. Beyond visual line of sight of you, the drone operator, with the transmitter in your hand and the drone going farther than you can see it. What will it take for those types of operations to happen regularly from both tech and regulatory perspectives? Jessie, I'm going to go ahead and kick that off to you, because that is really what you guys specialize in.
Yeah. So beyond visual line of sight is really a major milestone for the industry right now. Currently in the United States, regulations state that you have to, there are certain rules, like you can't fly within 5 miles of an airport, you have to fly below 400 feet, etc., and you have to fly within visual line of sight. And this really is prohibitive for many, many reasons. So what will have to change? Obviously we'll have to get some regulation change. There are certain test sites within the US right now in the FAA, I think 5 sites around the US where you can fly beyond visual line of sight, you can test your systems. There are certain sense and avoid systems that you're putting on drones. And the way that Altiscope is thinking about this is sort of how does your drone, or what requirements must you have as an operator, as a drone manufacturer, to unlock certain airspaces. So what equipment must you have on your drone? What licensure must you have as an operator? What environment must you be operating in? What type of airspace, etc. And so it's sort of, I think about it as gamification, because I think games are really cool. So what's the gamification of your airspace? You know, what are those levels, those thresholds you have to hit in order to be able to operate in a certain area, or operate, for example, beyond visual line of sight?
Nice. This is a really good one. My Slido, how do I, I have to click the check. Me? I'm looking at the third question. How long will it, oh sorry. No, there we go. Okay, we're good. So, what skills and backgrounds are important for a career in the drone industry? Jono, you've done a lot of stuff. You've hired a bunch of people. Tell us a little bit about that. The skills and backgrounds important for a career in the drone industry.
Yeah, so we're now about 75 people at DroneDeploy, and I think Ian and maybe 1 or 2 others knew what drones were and could fly drones and things like that before we hired them. So we kind of think of ourselves as like a software company first. So are you a good programmer that anyone would really hire? Can you write good JavaScript, Python? Are you good with data? That's the kind of stuff that we typically look for. On the hardware side, you're very much looking for like those EE types, mathematics, like a lot of control theory. That's really what's driving the hardware. Some aerospace on the hardware side as well, but yeah, I'd say it's just another industry now. It's like what skills do you need to be in the social media industry? Well, just know how to program well, and what it's actually doing is just it's not that big an impact. You kind of learn that stuff on the job.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on to that. Like, I'm not a software person myself. I'm not a hardware engineer. I did fly helicopters, which got me into drones. But I mean, really, I'm like just a general business person. So I mean, like marketing, business development, and sales. Like that's the cool thing, is that now drone companies, there's so many other opportunities out there. So there's success and support. There's just being on the administrative team as well. And so like if you really want to join a drone company, there are a lot of options now. But if you want to be programming and designing the airframes and things, you definitely need to be a bit more specialized. And so this next question on Slido, here we go. I figured it out now. So this is the next second most upvoted question. I already have a feeling who this is from, but how can we make sure drones don't crash into other airplanes? And so Romeo, I'll kick this over to you, because DJI does have some technology integrated into their aircraft that help it avoid obstacles. And I'm not just going to say it avoids airplanes, but there's a whole level of complexity there. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
So I think there's 3 different levels. So there's the human level, the operator level. Education is part of it. If you stay within the limits that we currently have, then you should not be encountering a fixed-wing aircraft. You could potentially encounter a helicopter because they fly different patterns than fixed wing. So if you stay below 400 feet, if you stay away from airports, that will already help. Now, there are certain projects where you will have to fly in those environments. So what can you do? Well, then there comes the hardware side into the equation. So additional sensors that are being added to platforms that give the operator information about the traffic around him or herself and his or her machine. ADS-B, for example, on the latest platforms for the commercial sector, the Matrice 200 series, we've built in ADS-B receivers. So you as the operator can see all the manned aircrafts that have the corresponding transmitter, and you can see their location, their distance, their altitude. And by a couple more years, all manned aircrafts need to have that transponder embedded. So that's what you can do on the hardware. And then of course there's also the software side, where you can geofence platforms. And again, if you geofence, you're opening up a whole other set of problems, because the moment you say you cannot fly here, you have somebody who has a valid reason to fly exactly there, like public safety. And so now you have to unlock those guys, but you have to make sure that you only unlock them and not Joe Blow, who could be doing something silly if you were to be able to fly on the center of an airport. So it gets really complex, but there's good news. The education is getting better. The hardware and sensors that are being integrated are improving and are helping with the information flow. And on the software side, a lot of different projects are being built to help. And ultimately, in the not so distant future, these devices will be talking to each other. And the drone and the aircraft will know at some point, where is another piece in my airspace? And the drone potentially can then do a decision, maybe descend or move away, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the future, but as of right now, it does take every one of you to fly safely, to keep an eye out, to potentially have a visual observer to help look for helicopters or other airplanes in the air to stay safe.
Very nice. So this question I'm going to pose to you, Jessie. So I'm skipping around a little bit. I'm kind of checking out the questions. So this is really cool. So you've been involved with a lot of like humanitarian nonprofit work in your entire career. But this question is, where can I find information about volunteer or internship opportunities in the drone industry? So do you know of anything? I mean, are there some organizations maybe that try to help out people with drones?
Yeah, so there's a couple of companies that come to mind. We Robotics is doing a lot in the humanitarian UAV world. They have international deployment, so they have a flying lab in Peru, they have flying grounds in Nepal, so that would be a good place to look for resources. They also, the founder of We Robotics, Patrick Meyer, also has UAViators, which is a humanitarian UAV operator group. And so, for example, if there is a humanitarian disaster, he posts updates, he posts asks, he posts certain rules and regulations and how to contact the local government, how to actually be helpful in these types of situations, rather than, as Ian mentioned, frequently as a drone pilot, if you don't know what you're doing, you can actually be a hindrance. And not just a hindrance, you can actually shut down all the operations that are trying to do good in the area. So those are two resources. In terms of internships and other jobs, I think a lot of drone companies are hiring. So just go check out their hiring pages. Jono with DroneDeploy hiring.
Yeah, definitely. DroneDeploy.com/careers.
DJI is probably hiring as well. Commercial Drones FM. If you want an internship, maybe I'll pay you a little bit of money. I would love that, by the way. Anyways, so the last question, guys, so it's 8:28. I want a somewhat ambiguous question that leaves us with questions in our head. So I'm choosing this one right here. It is, how big will drones get? So, how big will drones get? I mean, everyone can kind of answer this one. Romeo, what do you think?
No, the question is, how small will they get? I think that's the more interesting question. They will become extremely small, and they can become extremely large. Depends on what direction we want to go. But I think the more fun aspect is, how small can they become? Because then you can do some really amazing stuff.
I'm going to interpret that as how big can they get, as in how widely used, like, and I mean, it's pretty impressive. If you catch me after this, I'll show you a world map of where we have drones creating data, and we're in about 175 countries. This year, we've created as much like 3D, like high resolution 3D reconstruction of construction sites and farms and all other stuff, that if you put them all together and made like one big land mass of to scale 3D models, you'd actually fill up the size of Iceland. So they're starting to get pretty big, which is kind of exciting. How big can they get? Well, the world's a very big place. And it changes a lot, so you use them all the time. So I think a lot bigger.
And in terms of having another think about a drone, so a lot of the commercial aircraft that are being flown today are being flown in an automated fashion, 99% of the time. So perhaps only on takeoff and landing are they actually piloted by human.
That's it. Mike, drop the mic. Don't drop the mic. Wow, well thank you guys so much. I just wanted to say a couple more things before we go ahead and kick off the rest of the networking and try to polish off all that booze back there. So one thing I do in the podcast as well is I release these industry ebooks. It's just drone industry review. So I do this episode every quarter. It's called the Quarterly Drone Industry Review, and it's all the news. There's so much news. So much is happening in the drone industry, so I take it upon myself to catalog it and then to kind of keep a record of it and then release this episode of a podcast every 3 months. And in 20 minutes or less, I give you all the most important news as I see it, which is a little bit biased, but I feel like I'm pretty good at picking good stuff. So getting those drone industry ebooks is super easy. If you've signed up via Eventbrite to come here and RSVP'd, or via the General Assembly sign-up page, I already have your email, so it's cool. Like you're screwed. I'm going to email you anyways. But if you signed up through Facebook or something, or you just found out about it through a friend, if you want, you can write down with a pen on that piece of paper back there your email address, and then I'll send you this stuff for free. That's all. Like I just send it to you, so you'll get all the future ones, as well as I'll make sure to link up the past ones. And I'm just releasing the Q3 one. And then finally, subscribe to the podcast. If you listen to podcasts, if you don't listen to podcasts, it might be a good time to start. Again, Romeo and I had an awesome episode where he talks about the Vietnam caves and more. And I'm hoping to get Jessie and also Jono on the episodes as well. But over 58 episodes and growing. It's been over a year, so I passed that hump of people usually stop a side project, but it's been awesome. So would love if you subscribe, check out the podcast, send me an email at ian@commercialdrones.fm, and that's pretty much it. I think we should give our attendee, our panelists, that's that. So thank you so much for coming to the first Commercial Drones FM event. There's some booze in the back, and we'll be hanging around the chat. Thanks.